So I'm the guy who launched a war with the Steno Machine yesterday. There's a little bit of an interesting backstory, and I think you'll find some value in it, partly because it's new litigation technology that you can use, and partly because I've noticed that this isn't necessarily a law conference, right? I've been listening to the speakers, and they're not telling you what you may or may not have learned in law school. They're talking about building a business out of your law firm, and that's pretty interesting. I have a lot of respect for domain knowledge, people who are experts in their fields. Maybe many of you went from a general, say, law degree and have found a lane, or from what I'm hearing from speakers, maybe many of you are looking to find a lane, a niche for your firm, which is essentially your business. It turns out there's time for evolutionary change and there's time for revolutionary change. And these quotes that I put on the screen are kind of a reminder that, interestingly enough, revolutionary change typically comes from outside an industry. For whatever reason, people with deep domain knowledge have some blinders, some sacred cows that are just par for the course. That's what their peers believe. When I look at Steno reporting, and I've been in this business for a few years now, I see a lot of problems. And when I look at those problems, like the long turnaround times, and the expensive fees, and just the things that you know about probably better than I do, what I see are root causes. And the reason I pick on the Steno Machine is the root causes all stem from the limitations of that technology that was first invented, believe it or not, in 1877 and has dominated the legal system for 100 years now. So I want to talk about, why we would want to eliminate the Steno Machine, and that would be to get a revolutionary change and overcome those root causes. So it's my position that the machine that once enabled the live testimony to be captured and a good record is now what's holding the industry back. So I'd like you to think about a revolutionary change as something like this. Most of you are old enough, I would assume, to have once had a map in the glove box of your car. So you fly somewhere, maybe you buy a map. And remember what it was like following that paper map. You didn't know what roads were closed. Maybe that map was 2 years old. Maybe there's construction, maybe not. You had no idea. You could trace a place with your finger. You didn't know how long it was going to take or which was the best route. And today you navigate with Google Maps or Apple Maps or something. It's just a totally revolutionary difference. And that's what I mean by revolutionary. So my story, or this story, has kind of an unlikely start. I was kind of minding my own business, and by that I mean doing my small part to help revolutionize the production of healthcare records a number of years ago. And back then, medical transcription has been a thing for a long time. Physicians are busy, they need to get these things documented quickly, they dictate, somebody types, and you may be aware that the proliferation of electronic medical records a little over a decade ago was a really big deal. We went from narrative, much like legal instruments, to highly structured content that can be queried and things like that. So I was participating in that, figuring out how we can make medical records better, figuring out how we can do it faster, and I'll share a little bit more about that with you. So machine learning is kind of a buzzword today. It's something that my company's been working on for well over a decade. It's been a big part of how we've accelerated the production of healthcare records and so forth. At this point in the story, my company has about 4 patents on machine learning to improve speech processing, and primarily for the purpose of accelerating the production of medical records. We've developed software platforms and algorithms and have a workforce of nearly 300 people. And so we've accomplished some meaningful goals. Back in midsummer 2017, we had just completed what would be the largest of 15 acquisitions. So we'd had these patents, we had the software, we were trying to expand our footprint and apply these technologies in more places. So we were buying other documentation companies that were, say, tech backwards, and we were implementing our technology to bring them forward. I want to point out that I said this is the largest of the acquisitions, and it was kind of interesting because it was up in New England, and this particular company had started out all the way back in 1966 as a court reporting firm. So our lane had been health records, and from hearing other speakers, from what was discussed in the last talk, and I love that, by the way, Stephen Covey's probably my lifetime favorite author, and that was a great talk. But in your practice, in my practice, they're both businesses. We really need to focus on a niche, right? If you try to be all things to all people, that's almost a certain recipe for failure. And so what I often say to people, I wouldn't compare myself to Tim Cook, but he makes a great point. You've got to say no to good ideas. What I often say to people is, we're focused on a few things. If we have some great ideas, the only way we get permission to execute on new ideas that are, a serious steering pivot is to highly succeed at the ideas that we're working on today. Once we have a solid leadership team and we're scaling in that area, then perhaps we can afford to break off some dry powder and go focus on something else with additional people. So I looked at this business and I was attracted to it because it had a really substantial size healthcare segment, which is what I really wanted. But it had started out as a core reporting firm, so it had that department, and it also started a department that automated and did a lot of work for insurance carriers. So it was serving 6 of the largest 10 insurance companies in America. Pretty fascinating. I seriously contemplated buying only the healthcare part, and the retiring founder said he would do that. But I ultimately did decide to go ahead and purchase the entire company. So the team and I set about to do what we knew to do, and the healthcare segment was the largest. So we proceeded to implement that, roll out our technology, and it was a pretty aggressive thing, changing data centers, working with perhaps 1,000 customers to get them to change technologies and so forth. And that worked fairly well. I kind of left the court reporting department alone. One of the reasons that I had confidence to purchase it, by the way, is it'd been in business so long. They'd conducted over 60,000 depositions, had a great staff. Dean Whalen, who many of you have met, is my chief legal officer, and he was available to stay on and run that part of the business. So it was fine. It was just kind of on autopilot, doing what it did. Admittedly, I could barely spell court reporting. I mean, what I liked was that it was involved in converting spoken language into text records. And at that lowest common denominator level, at least it wasn't totally foreign to me. But I didn't know the compliance, the rules, things like that. But I had Dean, and that was great. Had another principal to run the insurance group. And I'd had the foresight about 1.5 years before this 2017 acquisition to hire a chief operating officer. His name is Bob, and he's in the room. And speaking of scaling, like many of you talked about here today and yesterday, that was a really big move for me because it's really difficult to manage innovation and all those mouths to feed, so to speak, and keep people on, develop KPIs, keep them accountable for KPIs and so forth. So I felt like I had laid some track to be able to help manage a business that was in 3 vertical markets and kind of getting to be that broad. So I did acquire it, as I said, and we implemented healthcare. That went swimmingly. The insurance business was kind of novel, and so they were a little tech backwards, I would say, managing a lot of things with spreadsheets. So we proceeded to develop some technology to automate them, first with workflow, later with AI as a power tool to help do some of the work. And then I became curious about court reporting. Things were settling down. Our acquisition pipeline was drying up a bit just due to market conditions. Began reading a little bit. I read, for example, Jim Garrity, 10,000 depositions, and his follow-up one. And I love that quote. He said, "Depositions are the new trial." And I began to understand a little bit more about, in contrast to what a layperson, a technologist like me might believe from movies or television about how court cases are really prosecuted and settled and so forth. And I began to appreciate more the importance and the role of depositions and perhaps, our small part, but important part in them. But as an information technology entrepreneur, the more questions I asked, the more surprised I became. I knew that health records were important. They needed to be turned around quickly. They needed to be accurate. I was surprised that our customers tolerated a 14-day turnaround time. I was just surprised. I was like, if it's important, how can 14 days be the standard? And they tolerate us being late sometimes. I was learning that the costs had gone up and up over time, not flattened out, not gone down like every other segment of information technology. And so I studied it more and more. I ultimately conceived of the idea that we've been talking about at this conference with Readback, conceived of the idea but decided not to execute it. The reporters themselves liked going on site, and as best I could tell from interviews and so forth, so did attorneys. Enter the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Prior to that, we were doing maybe 3% of our depositions were hosted remotely, just because the witness couldn't travel or various reasons, logistics. And I really had as a KPI to try to grow that. And I thought, if we could get that to 20% or something, then that would be a meaningful amount enough that we could apply technology to it. And why would that be? Because we weren't going to send probably AI and multiple people into a conference room. That just seemed wrong. It seemed difficult to scale, to get people there and so forth. But when a deposition is happening over Zoom, now we already have a digital feed for what is happening. And so that made a lot of things possible in conjunction with technologies that we already had. So at one point, Bob, my COO, approached me and he said, hey, we had a great month last month, and the primary reason is that court reporting outperformed. I said, oh, what's up with that? He said, it's really interesting. It shows up on one invoice, and I also don't remember what the invoice was. It was somewhere $26,000, $32,000, something like that. And I said, somebody paid us tens of thousands of dollars for a deposition? He said, well, it was for a week of depositions. And so I pulled the thread back. I wanted to know, how and why could it be worth that much to an attorney to pay us that much? And it turned out it was for real-time reporting. And I encounter lawyers all the time who haven't experienced real-time reporting, so I'll just describe that really quick. So instead of a stenographer capturing the record and possibly providing a rough or providing the certified transcript days or weeks later, in this case, about a stenographer, a really high, powerful stenographer who is fast enough and accurate enough that she can produce the record and allow the attorney to read it at the time it's being produced. And so I became really curious about that, and I wanted to talk to some people about it. So I was able to talk to some customers and some other, friends and family type people who were aggressive litigators. And what I learned was that real-time reporting, because it was so scarce and it was a premium and it was very expensive, I learned that few people could afford it. So if you were representing a Fortune 500 company and it was a really big claim, and basically if the client had deep pockets, it was no problem. The additional cost wasn't a problem. And they were beginning to describe to me how this helped them, how they were able to perform better. And essentially, everybody wants a verbatim transcript, but what you really want is a verbatim transcript that supports your case, that advances your client's interest, right? And so I remember a long time ago in an attorney's office, I saw a little posted placard that said, for every closing argument I've ever given, there's the clear, concise, coherent one that I thought of the night before. There's the messy and unintelligible one I delivered in court, and then there's the even the better one that I thought of on the drive home, from court or something. Just a cute little saying. But translate that over into this area, and what I was finding from these litigators who had clients with deep pockets was that they believed that seeing the real-time report was helping them perform better, because they could scroll back through, remind themselves about what the witness said, apply a few tests about, hey, does that go far enough to advance my legal theory, or do I need to pin them down a little bit more, things like that. So I really became interested in that because what I was looking for, was a game changer. It's nice when you can use technology to pull cost out. It's nice when you can use technology to speed things up. And it's magic when you can use technology to do the Google Maps thing. To where, do you remember the first time when you were driving a route that you already knew or thought you knew, and Google told you to take an exit or something, and you thought, that doesn't sound right, but you go ahead and do it, and then half a mile later you see traffic backed up on the bridge or something, and you think, wow, that's amazing. I'd have been stuck there for an hour or more. So that's the type of thing I'm talking about. It's the type of thing that I got very excited about. And then when we got to a year ago, we were doing about 70% of our depositions online in Zoom. And I'd been further developing that idea through the pandemic and began some proofs of concept and so forth. And just to make a long story short, what we figured out was that we could apply technology, innovate the business model, and then this other thing that is kind of magical was forming. I'm kind of in the technology and in the business, but what I was fascinated about was to see that the lawyer saw it as not a linear movement, that just getting the draft faster isn't a little better, but having that access to the text during the deposition and so forth was a lot better. And so it depended on the litigator. Some people say, I don't need to see it, I find it distracting, maybe someday, but keep doing what you're doing. I just love getting the draft very quickly. So others say, hey, it's a game changer for me. I go on mental walkabouts from time to time while I'm deposing a witness. I've got my list of things I want to catch and stuff, but by having this active reporting, that we call it, basically the system, the technology and the people do the active listening for me. Because if I go on a little mental walkabout and think about a theory in my mind or something, the testimony is still captured, even if I missed it in my ears, and I can just take a moment and look at the screen and see it. So pretty cool stuff, and it seemed to be changing how people were approaching it. And if I haven't made this clear, what I really had in mind was, why do you have to be representing a Fortune 500 company or some other wealthy client with deep pockets to have access to this power tool as a litigator? What if we could create this capability and make it available to every lawyer every time to use it how they saw fit? So more democratize it. Dean likes to talk to me a lot, my chief legal officer, about access to justice and the pace of justice. And we think that these are impactful in both of those areas. Okay, so I spoke a little bit about real-time reporting. I referenced this, but I want to talk about economics for a moment. Think about 1990, 30 years ago, a little bit more. We've been in an information age acceleration for these 30 plus years, right? Really since the late 60s. Most everything we have, our clothing, our cars, etc., they go up, up, up with inflation that varies. What's happening to the cost of information technology, information processing? It's getting faster, better, cheaper. So is that what's been happening with court reporting? Nope. Up, 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 just like your shoes in your car. Why? Because it hasn't been benefiting, it hasn't been participating in the information economy like everything else has. Let me give you an example. In 1990, for medical transcription, the typical amount paid was 16 cents per line. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but about 16 cents per line across the page, okay? Now in 1989, I bought a new Mustang for $14,000. That car today would be $45,000, so about triple. Sound about right? So you might expect if medical transcription were to go the same way, and I haven't done the time value of money calculation, but I'd say about triple. So we might expect that to be around 45 cents. It's 12 cents. Back then, medical transcription was as simple as typing and putting text on a page. That simple. Today, it is formatting and structured data for EMRs, so third-party payers, government, etc., can actually query the information. It used to be that the common turnaround time was 48 hours. Now it's between 4 and 24. So the cost has come down by about a third. The value and the complexity of the content has soared up, and the time it takes to produce the records has fallen dramatically. Don't you think your industry deserves that? I do. There's a steno operator availability problem. According to a study, we're diverging. The supply and demand is collapsing. We're retiring 1,100 a year, bringing 100 new ones in a year. Young people don't even get it, why it's a profession. So there's a huge gap. Some people want to talk about, and there are some interesting issues with compliance and so forth, but some people want to talk about whether or not this type of technology change is appropriate. Well, I'm here to tell you whether my company were here or not, whether we were successful or not, has nothing to do with whether stenography continues to be the primary capture method for depositions. It's a numbers game that's impossible. There's no way for the steno shortage to be overcome at this point. And the association's been trying. The machine is hard on its operators. You look at these steno operators, if they've been doing it for a couple of decades, they've got scars from surgeries and so forth. They miss work because of the repetitive stress injuries. So I say it's time for active reporting. I've thrown these benefits up here. We're saying all the time for simple low flat rates. 1 day for a certified transcript. In 1 hour you get a rough transcript, and in less than a minute you can see the text that was just spoken by you, by opposing counsel, by the witness. I want to share just briefly back to this outsider perspective. It's kind of interesting. I feel blessed that we're in a unique position to do this, because I mentioned that we had machine learning patents and things like that. When I want to look across the board at other companies who are doing great things with machine learning, and a lot are, I don't see any of them that happen to own a court reporting firm with 50 years of experience and 60,000 deposition source of data and experience. When I look at court reporting firms, I don't see any of them with machine learning capability. And so that kind of gives you an idea of how we could get there. I won't get into this really. It's kind of a guided walkthrough to help you understand what happens and why it's possible. But I just want to touch on one thing real quick. I mentioned how you as an attorney can have access to this text. We call it near time because it's somewhere between, a few seconds and a minute, a little bit slower than real time. But what's really cool is once we do this, you can actually collaborate with experts or co-counsel. So with people who are not in the room with you or on the Zoom, if you want, they can monitor the transcript and they can annotate it for you. So you could have an expert call BS on what your witness is saying and give you something to ask them back. Or a co-counsel who's just more experienced, something like that. So you can actually have a collaboration effect. It's not just you that can see the transcript as it's being built in near time, it's whoever you choose. And you can share annotations and so forth in it. So while you'd never let a witness do that, I don't believe it's against the rules for an attorney to do it.
The Steno Machine. The machine that's been at the heart of court reporting for more than 100 years. But not anymore. For too long, lawyers have felt the pain of depositions bogged down by excessive per-page fees, add-on fees, difficulty scheduling, long turnaround times, and so much more. The problem? Reporting. Steno reporting is, well, broken. The solution? A whole new category of reporting designed for the modern era. Meet Readback, the very first service to offer active reporting. Active reporting means certified transcripts in 1 business day, rough transcripts in 1 hour, access to transcript text during the proceeding, easy online scheduling, and recordings for verification, all for low, simple, flat rates. Active reporting enables more agile lawyers and more effective depositions. It's time to say no to Steno and yes to the future of deposition services. Active Reporting by Readback.
Those low flat rates are published right on the website, by the way. It's transparent, there aren't hidden fees. If you'd like to register, there's no cost to register, there's no obligation, but you will have access to our resource library that will help you understand the technology more and begin a dialogue with us. My last slide is, I want to say, I'm not a lawyer, so I won't really pretend to know exactly how you will use this technology. I'm just kind of proud of the technology, and I'm really intrigued and inspired to see what others are saying and how they're using it. So I'll just close with the notion of once you have access to this technology for your clients without paying more, what will you do with active reporting? Thank you.
Thanks for that great presentation, Nick. We really appreciate it.